Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 72 of Coffee and Darts, where I interview darts players, other live streamers, YouTubers, as well as manufacturers and those that help the darts community like we've got this morning. But hey, if you're watching, go ahead and give me a ton 80 there in the comments if you can, if you're not getting dartitis or typeitis, I should say, of typing out that ton 80. But hey, guys, we typically do shows every Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. and then occasionally on Thursdays. And just to let you know, next week we've got a Monday morning show and a Tuesday morning show. So some back-to-back action there. It's going to be a lot of fun. But without further ado, I do want to get into our guests because we're talking about something that we all typically have issues with, whether it's in darts or other areas of our life. Let's bring on our guest. Of course, that is the illustrious Dax. I'm going to figure out your name at some point, man. Dax Mana and the Princess of Darts, Jennifer Mounts herself. But before we do that, I need to thank my sponsors. And first one we got to shout out to is Shot Darts. Just thank you to them for sponsoring the show. And of course, they make incredibly beautiful pieces of art that we get to throw. And my jerseys, where do those come from? Well, those come from Magicwear, where you can get off-the-shelf designs. You can get some customized, semi-custom designs to the full customized design. And, of course, Jen Mounts can help you out with that. And we don't want to forget Condor Darts, their flight and shaft system. It's an all-in-one system. I personally use the Axe system. Very happy with it. All right, let's get on with our guests and start talking about some Dartitis. Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, Dax. I'm sorry. I'm gonna create a new name for you. How's that? I love your name, man. It's like I wish my name was Dax. I'm like, it's just Matt.
I should probably just take the last name off the Chiron and just Dax, like Prince or Madonna. Just let it stand alone.
I think we'll go with that. From now on, it's just gonna be Dax. Good morning, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, you guys. Really excited for this topic. I know Dax, he could easily handle this topic on his own, but I'm always happy to be here and share my own stories. And hopefully, if we have time, maybe talk a little bit about how to conduct yourself around someone that has Dartitis or the Yips. I think that's not talked about ever, and people do need a little lesson in compassion and what is helpful and what is not helpful there.
So what you're saying is Dax is going to have some issues today, and you're here to kind of help him. Okay, I got it.
No, not an attack at Dax at all.
he might get some speakitis and need a little bit of help. So totally understand. So yeah, we are talking about Dartitis, which if anybody read Dax's article, and if you haven't, you need to run over to A to Z, go to the blog section. It's the first blog there. Really good look at what Dartitis is, or more importantly, what I know, Dax, you like to call the Yips. You don't like the idea of Dartitis because that kind of says it's all just a darts problem, which it's not. Would you just take a second and kind of explain what Dartitis is for those that may not have experienced it or may not know what it is?
Sure. In working with some players who had struggled with a self-described Dartitis, it really kind of threw me back into research and reading and to say, well, let's go back to the beginning. Let's look at the history of it. Let's look where the word itself was first used and where it first came from. And to my discovery, there was not as much literature as I would have thought. And there are some great dart historians and some great dart players in the past who have opened up and talked about it publicly. And it's something that sadly has come with some shame to it, with some apprehension about being open about it. And what was sad to me is that there wasn't as much as I thought there could have been. So in doing my research and seeing all the other kind of keywords and catchphrases that were associated with it, it made me just kind of search further down, down into the Google search and really come up with much more when you put in the word the Yips. And the Yips itself, in terms of its first usage, goes back to the early 1900s. And it really started with a golf player coining the term. And you realize so many of these terms, even the catchphrases we hear in modern day news, they're buzzwords that kind of catch on for a while. And Darditis is a fun, playful, personalized term for our game, but it limits our search. When we search for anything on the internet these days, we want to start broad and then kind of narrow to get more specific. And that's really what I did with wanting to help players who were struggling to say, well, I don't know everything there is to know about it, and it's important to approach it all as a student. And when I did such, I really wanted to say, there's so much here that I know players struggling aren't getting to. They're not really touching upon, even if they are getting past the fear and apprehension of really digging into it. So really what it boiled down to in my search was there were two main components to what the Yips, as it kind of the Yips ends up being much more of a symptom as opposed to what's at the root cause. And the two kind of origins that were talked about at length that I tried to distill down in the article were the psychological origin dealing with performance anxiety and certain types of performance anxiety. And then what was interesting to find that there was potentially a neurological component through something called focal dystonia, which sounds big and scary, but is really more readily known as writer's cramp, in essence of how we describe it in everyday talk. So I wanted to approach the article not so much as a way to say, here's the fix. I wanted to approach the article as a way for players to approach the topic more openly with less shame, to try to really take a look inward and say, where did my Yips or Darditis, where did it start? Where did it begin for me? And when you kind of go back to the root cause is when you can start to unwind and unravel towards addressing it.
Sorry about that. That's a good, look at it. I read through the article and I was like, wow, I was amazed at the amount of information that you were able to pull out. And I guess it's really because of the angle that you looked at the problem. And just to clarify, and Jen, if you could jump in on this, because I'm assuming and I'm making an assumption based on some comments that you made that this is something that you have dealt with at some point. And if you could talk a little bit about that. But we're not talking about tennis elbow. We're not talking about turf toe, which are terms that we hear for specific sports injuries. This isn't so much an injury as much as it's a neurological situation or it's a mental block that you might have. And Jen, I don't know, and you can talk to it and say, yeah, this is something that I've had. I'm sure that's my issue because I got a lot of mental blocks going on for everything. But can you talk a little bit about it as a darts player, someone who was, basically in the pro type level of darts?
Absolutely. I mean, Dax is pretty spot on. I think it's surprising actually how much you could add to that initial article. I would say the opposite. I could go part 2, part 3 right now. It's an excellent intro article. Again, you can go to the AtoZdarts.com blog. It's the very latest article on there. It's an excellent read. I would definitely start there, and it's important to take this in steps because for me, absolutely agree. There is a psychological condition. There's a neurological condition. You could also have both. So for me, it was 100% psychological. And I actually quit playing darts for a combination of reasons. One being I started developing the warning signs of Darditis or the Yips. And it was really surprising to me because my personal darts coach, when I first started playing, struggled deeply with this condition. And I had learned everything that I could to, prevent myself from ever being put in that position. And I felt like I had a very good understanding of, what are those warning signs and what could I do to never let this happen? So I was kind of shocked that I kind of abandoned, all of those mantras that I had developed for myself and started to get a little bit of that hitch. So I think a lot of people can resonate with, some of the things we're going to talk about, but I do think it's a little more rare than people think. For example, just because you deal with performance anxiety in general, or if you choke during high pressure stakes matches, or any of these symptoms, it definitely wouldn't necessarily mean that you're actually struggling with a condition, because Darditis and the Yips is an extremely debilitating condition that it needs to be discussed, and I would love to see stories shared so people can start taking those preventative measures versus feeling like they're put themselves into like a shamed corner and then finally decide to manage full-blown onset of the Yips. So it is full out an apparent loss of your fine motor skills without any explanation sometimes. So it's so much more extreme than I think what any athlete tends to actually experience on a day-to-day basis, or just dealing with pressure. A lot of people suppress those feelings and don't want to have to deal with them if you do drink heavily when you play, or any kind of performing enhancing drug or any kind of depressant drug. Super common in our culture. It's super common. However, Darditis for me, because I didn't experience the neurological side, what plainly put was just the inability to throw the dart the way that I've trained myself to, the complete lack of flow. Whether that be physically, you just can't let go of the dart due to tension in your throwing arm or muscle spasms, or mentally, you just absolutely lack the confidence to throw with your tried and true mechanics. So something that I was discussing with Dax is my exact language that I used in my own head was, I was so afraid to miss the target that I would purposefully self-sabotage and do something different with my mechanics to propel the dart forward. I was so afraid to just confidently throw. And obviously that's not a good plan B, but that was my body and mind's reaction to what was going on with this slight little hitch that I was feeling last minute. It's like the dart just gets stuck. So it's typically in your take back, from all the stories that I've heard others talk about and professionals that have been in this limelight. It's as if there's just little tiny click, and it might be really subtle and other people might not be able to notice it. But for me, it was really clear as day. I know, what my point A, B, and C should feel like. And it was just this last little, stick in my throw. Some people throw in a little extra pump or slight movement, and that's their own form of the Yips kind of taking control, and they're not really able to just throw as they should be. So it's something that happens, and then you can't really, it takes a hold of you, and you can't really do anything in the moment to deal with it. It kind of comes and it goes. So more people that, deal with performance anxiety, they're pretty hyper aware of the situation. They can maybe talk themselves off that ledge. I would argue that with the Yips, it's not that way. It's a condition that has been developing over several years. And once it gets a hold of you again, like as I said, you can't then talk yourself out of it or do something physically in the moment to deal with it. So in a nutshell, I would say that that's how I define it. But as Dax said, it is really important to think about research, and typing in the Yips does open in so many avenues, because this condition is not specific to darts. It transcends culture, it transcends sports. It's not an American darts issue, it's worldwide. So I definitely implore you all to research as much as you can, and be very careful with taking in advice about it, because that alone could be the reason why you have the Yips, is you got overwhelmed with information and advice.
So just to kind of take this down to like almost a first grade level, where Dartitis or the Yips would essentially be, this is a mechanical thing where mentally you can't release the dart, you can't throw the dart, you've created a hitch in your throw, and it doesn't necessarily mean that every throw is that way. If you go to Barry Van Peer, who was a professional darts player, he would get the Yips, but he would be playing well, and then his third dart would be the Yips issue. Like he would get into the treble 20, and then he would like almost throw the dart off the board type of situation. And that's where he would, that was his Dartitis. He would get this hitch at the elbow in his throw. If you go online, you'll see videos of him, and you'll be like, this guy looks like he's playing okay, and then all of a sudden you'll see this. part of it could be in a sense where you're ahead, you're leading, and it becomes a mental issue where you just can't, you allow everybody to come back and beat you because you get this hitch in your throat, this yips in your throat. So that's kind of taking it down to, you know, like a basic level where it's this situation. We've seen players, they literally can't release the dart. I'm trying to remember the player who about 2 years ago during a PDC event, he just like he stood there and he did the throw motion and the dart never came out of his hand. He just kept gripping the dart. These are dartitis or yips issues. But Dax, if you could take this and like maybe break it down for those that are like in your garage and all of a sudden this is starting to happen, what are signs that this is really what it is versus you're just having a bad day?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as Jen alluded to, it's delicate. It's that sometimes some of these things creep in slowly, and you don't recognize them, and before you know it, and you're fully aware, it's kind of consumed you. And when it gets to the point where it's really enveloped your whole game, and it's on your mind from the moment you pick up the dart, it can be devastating. You know, without wanting to put you know thoughts into players' heads, is this developing? You know, it ends up being much more, and to how I wrote about it and how Jen spoke about it, it's not simply about nerves, and this is the important takeaway too. When I was reading all about performance anxiety and putting this article together, you hear so many players talk about it cavalierly in the pubs about, oh, they're just nervy, or they have no bottle, or however it's defined, as though it's something where they're just not tough enough. This is not about a mental toughness. Everyone has experienced a level of anxiety on the line before, and we all have different thresholds for when anxiety kind of takes hold for us. This is not having the stage fright of stepping up to the line to start a match. This is not the moment of truth to win a match where it's game shot. This is basically levels of performance anxiety and different levels of fear, which creep in, that take hold at everything in between, when seemingly there's not a pressure dart on the line, when there's not a moment of truth. It's literally all-consuming. This is not just feeling nervy. And there's a distinction that needs to be made, because it's too easy a write-off just to say this is about nerves. This is much deeper. This is much more personal, and also why it shouldn't be written off as the one and only thought behind it. It's not just nerves. There are different levels and different origins of performance anxiety, which can infect every individual. It's not a blanket statement. It's not a blanket description. And this is why I really wanted to put this article together, because the challenging part is for each player to look inward and say, which parts are really affecting me? Because it's not all the parts, and it's not just because I'm nervous. But what are the parts that are truly making me anxious? What are the parts that I truly fear? And when you start kind of at that level is when you can kind of work backwards to go forwards. You really want to get, in my opinion, you want to start at the root cause and say, which parts are really getting to me?
So it's not going to necessarily be a mental situation where you're having a bad day at home. You know, maybe the kids got to you. It's not that particular feeling in regards to, oh, I'm just throwing bad because of this situation. This is more of it's like a mental roadblock to doing what you know that you're supposed to do. When we get to the neurological, the mental aspect, why people practice darts, why people do things. If you think about your mental everyday, how you go about, like you get in your car, you start the car, you do those things, you don't even think about it. It's just a natural reaction. It's just what you do. It's that side of your brain that just kind of takes over. It doesn't need any energy to think. That's why when you're driving, you'll pull off an exit that you always go to, and you're like, oh crap, I was supposed to go to the next exit. It's the mental aspect. And that's where the game of darts, you want to get to that, to where your throw is just that. It's the same thing. It's consistent. It's the flow. You don't even have to think about it. You just get to the Aki, and that magical feeling of and you're like, oh crap, I won, and I didn't even realize I was playing. That's the kind of the mental aspect of where you want to get to. That's where the best players in the world, outside of Gerwin Price, who got Dartitis when he was trying to hit the 10 and the 5 in the World Championships. But outside of that, that's where Dartitis becomes an issue, or the Yips is where we get that roadblock over.
But let's I want to cut you off there, because let's make a point. That was the moment of truth. That's not the Yips. That's him recognizing the moment and feeling the pressure, as so many have, and like having that moment where it's like, I see the finish line, but I have to cross it.
Yes. And so that's not what we would call the Yips or Dartitis. That's the pressure of the moment. My understanding of the Yips and Dartitis from playing other sports and doing, just everyday life. This isn't just a sports related situation. We talk about it in darts because that's what we're talking about. That's our love. That's our passion. It's the game we play. But you can get this in all aspects of life, where you can't get over that hump. And it's not performance in regards to that I'm just not good enough to get over that person's just better than me. This is really a matter of you almost can't move. You physically can't do it. And so when that happens in darts, because that's what we're talking predominantly about, what could be some signs that you're really getting to that aspect? What could be something that you're like, and I'm going to throw this question out to both of you. I mean, what should people be looking for in a smart way? Not, oh, I had a bad night, or, oh, I can't hit the 10 because it's a pressure situation. It's the literal, I can't, see if I can get my camera here. You can't get the motion out. Typically, when I've seen people that have the Yips, it's normally they will double pump on a throw. It'll be a hitch in the elbow. You can see their shoulder lock up if you go and watch some of the videos of the people that have done that. And as far as to literally their fingers can't release the dart. They're like pressing as hard. They're white fingered on the barrel and they can't release it. What are some signs outside of that being, but like I'm progressing into that? I'm going to ask both of you because you both have some different perspectives on that. What do you think are signs? Jen, I'm going to start with you, and then Dax, if you'll jump in and answer it.
Sure. There are physical warning signs and there are mental warning signs. So I can say for myself, I think I already alluded to that before. My warning sign was I got stuck in my take back. And so I couldn't keep, I'm going to use my dart here. I couldn't keep my grip solid and secure, and something would just flip and release. I wasn't able to actually have a release action without changing something about my tried and true mechanics to just get over this, this clench. I got onto the tips of my toes, which is a terrible, terrible habit. You want to dig the weight of your whole body into your heel, because if you do that, nothing else can move. People that have issues with jumping, or I would suggest, just relax, breathe out, let all of your weight sink into your heel, and even have someone put their hand on your non-dominant throwing shoulder. Even just the act of that physical touch there, it might prevent you from that last minute little jump, which makes you feel like you're choking. It's just a combination of mental, physical anxiety, that all work synergistically against you. A lot of other people, though, that I've seen with the Yips, they propel their body forward in order to get the dart out of their hand. It's that last little jerk. Sometimes even their chest moves forward, and they get so off balance that their non-dominant, instead of their planting foot, the one that's just rotating and pivoting, it swings forward over the toe line. Some people actually just have that habit as a part of their throwing mechanics, but I think a lot of people that is a result of the Yips. So there's some really obvious physical warning signs, and there are other more subtle things, like you don't know if the pumps and everything, if that's just them relieving tension in general, if that's normal, or if that's a sign of the Yips. But changing your mechanics, or if you have to force yourself to change your mechanics in order to release the dart or just complete the throw, that's probably a sign in itself. And then,
Jen, real quick, sorry to interrupt, but when you talk about that leap forward, I think of Mensur Solovic. Mensur, he'll throw that last third dart a lot of times. You'll see Mensur throw that dart, and he's walking toward, like he's already walking as he's throwing. Would
Yeah.
you consider that maybe something that was the yips for him at some point, and he just created this, or do you feel like that's just his throw?
Not necessarily. It's an individualistic thing that could be yes or no, depending on the person. One thing I can say is, I haven't been playing darts for decades. I'm not a pro, and I can't sit here and be like, oh, and critique professionals.
Yes, you can. It's totally okay. You can.
But I
do it all the time. I do it all the time.
What I would say to that is, I think that's more commonly a sign of more of like a masculine strength kind of aspect, to where you're just like forcing the dart, or you see a lot of men more often than women. They have that little, like, if you watch closely, their back foot lifts a little. It's that like, oh, I'm just going to get the dart in the board. I see this in racquetball. I know this is a weird comparison, but when I played racquetball, that was my favorite sport ever in college. And I'd play, men all the time, and they would hit the ball as hard as possible, where that sport is a lot more about technique and ball placement. So it's just an example of, commonalities that I've seen amongst amateur players, even pros. They've been doing it their whole lives. So like Mansour, for example, I'm positive that is just his habit. I would argue it's a bad habit. And again, to sit back and be like, oh, all these guys have these bad habits, what have I done? At the end of the day, in comparison, that's silly. But you can black and white say this is what darting mechanics, throwing mechanics, ideally in a perfect world should look like. And here are the top 10 players, and here's the similarities amongst them and why they might be successful. Of course, there's so much more that goes into the game of darts, but it is important to break those components down. And so people that, when they throw that third dart and do something different than the 1-2, that's just naturally a bad habit. I'm not saying it will be so debilitating that they can't get to that professional level, kick ass in the PDC. I'm just saying that could be the difference between second and first place, ultimately over time. So that last little jolt, or really forcing the dart, throwing harder than necessary, it could be a problem, it could not be. But a lot of people also, an example of the leaping forward thing, I think another thing is, when you have the resting darts in your hand, you've picked up your second, you've picked up your third dart, and that hand, which is normally like this to your side, when it drops, that's another sign of you're doing something different on your third dart. Again, it might not be the difference of winning or losing a match, but once you get down to the nitty gritty of you're facing opponents that are a fraction better than you or a fraction underperforming you, those little things might matter, those little habits in the average overall aspect of your game. John Baxter, the owner of Magic Darts, he yells at people all the time, why are you walking towards the board? Why haven't you completed your throw and completely finished your follow through before stopping and then walking to the board? That's an interesting thing to point out for sure, but I definitely would say 9 times out of 10 that would not be a warning sign of the yips or a reasoning or a result of the yips.
And I took myself off screen there just so that you could show a little bit more.
Sorry.
I just wanted to make sure that people could see you, kind of the motions you were making, comments you were making. So throwing that question back to you, Dex, what would be signs? And Jen, if you want to jump in, because I cut you off there, I apologize. I noticed that the Mensur thing, and he has lost matches because of that for certain. It's more like it's a throw out of frustration, but it seems like he's just incorporated it into his throw so much so that he does it consistently, but it throws that third dart a lot of times ends up missing the mark. So that wouldn't be considered necessarily the yips as much as a bad habit. So they're not the same thing. We need to determine, what's one versus the other. A bad habit's a bad habit. It's something that you can fix by some coaching and understanding what the bad habit is. Dartitis is completely a separate thing. And so I'm going to throw the question back to you, Dax. What are some signs that this is happening? It's starting to become part of your, who you are almost.
The couple of players that I've worked with that have displayed it and have basically done something akin to what Jen is talking about, and it was most prominently displayed, I think, with Mark Webster, with that lean, that upper body coming forward and not being able to release the dart. When you're in your posture and most of your weight is on that front foot and you have your arm up ready for action, if that arm is not coming forward, but your body is. That the upper body is leaning forward, and you're almost coming off that back foot. And yet the arm's not coming forward, and the dart's not coming out. That's something to pay attention to. It's something to take note of. If there is one commonality that I've seen in watching lots of footage of the pros, it's that upper body coming forward without the arm really doing anything, and that inability to truly release the dart. Again, and going back to Menser's got what you wouldn't call textbook form or form you would teach. And while there are players who can be successful in their very unique forms, to look at Menser's growth as a player, he as a much younger player before he was on camera, if you go look for older clips of him and some talk of him, he talks about how years ago he might have had struggled with the yips, and perhaps in trying to go through the iterations of his form and his balance, this is what he settled on as his kind of rhythmic way to fight through. And again, there even you go to someone like Eric Bristow and Champion, who had the most unique of grips and draws and releases. What he taught to Taylor, he didn't teach Taylor how to grip the dart, because they gripped it very differently. So you really think about what affects different players differently. And I certainly can come up with hypotheses on each player, and I like to on an individual level, but I'm not a clinician. I'm not someone who wants to diagnose specifically. When people want to talk about their specific journey and experience in darts, I'm always happy to do that on an individual basis, but I don't think it's fair to make blanket statements. There are the symptoms like we're talking about, the lean and the pump and the hitch, but to be fair to each individual, everyone's coming from a unique place. Everyone's coming from their own life experience and their own pressures and their own, darts should be part of our escape. And sometimes we don't fully escape the rest of our life, and too much of it can creep into our game if we can't tune out otherworldly pressures. It becomes unfortunate, because we all do this for a level of fun and recreation. And for those who really look to do it on a more competitive and pro level, it's their moneymaker. And to try to combat any levels of, you're starting to see players, professional players, even talk about having coaches and having mental coaches. I really appreciated hearing Van Dijvenboden talk about getting mental coaching. He seems to be a guy who's quite energetic and has a lot of extra energy to burn. But I think he also recognizes how he needs to find a way to level off, because he's obviously very skilled. So he needs to be able to keep that level, the emotional level, kind of flat, so that he doesn't deal with those spikes and those crashes.
So just to kind of bring this up, because I know we've been talking about a couple pros that have dealt with this, like Kyle Anderson. Some people think that he's had some dartitis issues because he does the double pump. I asked him about that, and he said it was something that he tried and it worked for him and he liked it. So just because you see people, have a different throw, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a dartitis issue. I just want to point that out. But a question that came up from our friend Will Stewart, I'll throw this up here. He's wondering, and you guys watch this, and I'm curious, Dax, because you typically watch with a different eye when watching darts. Did you think that maybe Danny Baggish had a little bit of dartitis in round 1 of the World Championships? Is that something that you saw? I don't remember seeing it. I'm going to go back and watch again and just see if that was maybe the case, outside of maybe more or less just being at the World Championships first round. He was playing Hedda, and I mean, that was a tough match to have. So your thoughts?
A great question, Will. Again, full circle and individual experience. Danny also spoke of personal tragedy he was dealing with, personal issues he was dealing with. Obviously, he's also representing America, and America's doing its best to put great players on the stage, and they are. I didn't see anything like that. I know what Will is referring to in Danny's posture and his little bit of a pause, and the dart comes into his face as he leans in. It's not at all. I think that's Danny's throw. Perhaps at times he might have had one or two that were slower than the other, but you know what? He's in a moment. He's in a serious moment against a serious player. I thought he performed brilliantly. All things considered, he was dealing with stuff back home. We're all dealing with COVID, and he's also dealing with a world-class player on a stage. Not at all. That didn't cross my mind.
So probably more a little bit of nerves versus yips. Now, when we talk about the yips, it's not something that just happens for one match, one game. This is actually a debilitating situation that travels with you until you get help. It'll technically get worse. I guess you could maybe play out of it. I personally have never had it that I know of. My game is just average. And so I've never been to a level where I felt like I couldn't, or I had a hitch or something. And part of that's probably just because I don't have a consistent throw at this point that I feel is anyway. I'm just not maybe the perfect person to ask in regards to this. So Jen, I want to switch over to you in regards to if you want to talk a little bit more about what it's like, getting that, what's that feeling? Where does it come from? Along with, let's start talking a little bit about how do we get beyond it? What are the fixes for it? Because a lot of people say, I've got Darditis, or this guy's got Darditis, but how do you get out of it? What's the fix? That's really the most important thing.
That is the real question that most people come out the gate with. However, I really do think Dax is onto something. I think the reality is once you know why you have it, then you know the fix. And I'm not saying you might not have the resources or time or energy to go down that path. And a lot of people quit because of that, or because they just simply cannot develop good coping mechanisms to get over it. People develop bad habits. They might start just playing so slow to where, they're able to release the dart, but it takes so much concentration. There's maybe 20 seconds between each dart, and then the game's not enjoyable anymore. Not for you, not for your opponents. You might start drinking heavily. You might suppress all of these feelings in your thought process with alcohol and drugs. You might start throwing with your opposite dominant hand and have to start completely over. There's a combination of things that we do see people giving advice about and what to do. And I really disagree with the like what Dax is saying, these blanket statements and people giving advice. You got to be really, really careful with that. I would just warn people to even take advice from others that have the yips with a grain of salt. It might be only indicative to their symptoms and their internal struggle, especially when it comes to the more common psychological aspect of it. I think if I had to guess, I would say more people struggle from the performance anxiety, but there's something within that is causing this. It's a thought, it's a fear of outcome. These things develop into a condition over a long period of time. And so for me, what it felt like, my mental warning signs were, number one, I got to a level of ability, I guess you could say, to where, okay, I'm now an A player. If I were to partner, when I play pairs with people, I'm going first. There's a different level of responsibility and pressure that you now feel. And beyond that, it was clear, that's why ratings are so dangerous to be worrying about, watching, thinking about your averages and ratings. So soft tip, they say your rating, and steel tip, you talk about your averages. And it can be a really scary road to go down, because in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, when I walk to the line, I'm starting a game of cricket. I absolutely have to hit 5 marks of 20 at the very minimum in order to have done my job. And it became so extreme in my mind that I'm thinking, oh, the whole world knows exactly A, what I'm capable of, and B, what I need to do when I'm at the line. And of course, this developed, a mental fear and anxiety of like, oh God, if every round was like my life was on the line. And it's ridiculous, right? The real crux of it all is no one cares. your partner doesn't even care. They're there to support you. They chose you for a reason. They're either there to have a great time. It's a social game for them. I'm talking even Friday night blind draws. Like, I'm sitting there with so much anxiety and fear, and it just doesn't matter at the end of the day. I felt better when it was singles, and like I only had myself to, disappoint and blame. But you get to a certain, level, you plateau, you're not climbing anymore. And so, Dax brought up a really interesting point in the article of players that rise and fall, too quickly. They got to be careful with how they're protecting themselves mentally, how kind you are to yourself. I mean, I'd walk up and I'd tell myself, like, don't you dare hit a 5, don't you wean into that 5. And the cruel things that I would say, in my own head. You can't tell from my exterior. I mean, I'm cool as a cucumber standing there at the line, but I was just beating myself up internally. So those are pretty terrible warning signs, I would say. Some people are naturally just inherently hard on themselves, and that's not a sign of the yips. But for me, that was unusual. I typically have good self-worth, self-confidence, pretty happy with, my actions and who I am as a person. And so it was kind of odd to be experiencing this extra level of pressure I'm putting on myself for no reason. And once I realized that was one of my issues, that's talking about a root cause, like a psychological diagnosis that I gave to myself. So number one, I was afraid to live up to what status or level I had achieved, and always doing that all the time. Number two, I generally just had a complete fear of outcome, a fear of missing. Every dart I walked up to that line and just thought, like, oh God, what if I miss it? And like I said before, because the fear was so grand, I wanted to feel anything but that. I would sabotage my own throw, and it took me years to realize this. I wouldn't throw confidently with a true release impact. I would kind of just let the dart fall out of my hand, or I'd release my grip too early and it would just kind of lob to the board. It would go in the general direction it needed to, but it would miss super high and low, and nowhere near the treble, nowhere near the double that I was aiming at. This allowed for a certain average to, people couldn't tell that was what was happening, but I knew, I'm nowhere near my actual intended target. I was afraid to even look at the segment in the eye, and that's, I always, if I were a mechanics coach, which I'm not, or a mental coach, I would say, look directly into the exact pixel of what you're throwing at. If you want a double bull, you need to look at it. Don't open your eye up to the whole bull segment. Look and shoot clear and through your target. So that's what I would say to myself, but I just couldn't talk myself out of these fears and these habits that were sabotaging my throw. And then beyond that, if you experience any psychological trauma or anything crazy uprooting in your life happens, it's not one particular thing. Often it's an accumulation of things that work together against you. So for me, right before I moved from Washington to California, I just came out of the closet. I've talked about those aspects of my life before on the show, and it all came together to just be this like social anxiety too on top of that. So I'm playing the game I love. I've put 3 straight years of practicing day and night. I used to wake up, play darts, go to bed and play darts. If I didn't finish my practice routine, I wasn't allowed to go to bed. Like, that's how serious I was, about my own regimen. And it's like all that just got thrown out the window, or I just gave up on it all. And so you got to think, again, mental warning signs. You're not only your own root cause, your own issue of allowing yourself to cope with these things in a bad way, and then you blame yourself on top of that. You say, oh, how could I have gotten to this point? Like, why am I experiencing this? I don't know how to deal with it. I think deep down we all know the real answer. Sometimes it just takes a certain phrase. For me, that phrase was my friend that taught me how to play darts. One day he just said, if you're afraid to miss, you simply need to think about darts as black and white. Like, you're at the line, you're either going to hit the target or you're going to miss it. So if you miss it, you better miss it confidently. And even though I had the word confidence in my head, it was, for some reason, that one sentence kind of pulled it all together. And so I had to say that exact full thing in my head every time I approached the line. Or I'd say things like, you're actually in control of your throw. Your body's not in control. You can, focusing on these these things that were outside of all of the actual mechanics that I used to think about helped. But Matt alluded to the concept of being on autopilot, and how, yeah, that's called the Zen mode. That's the ultimate, that's where you want to be. You want to be taking out the trash when you're throwing darts. And I think what the yips are is, taking a left turn from that, and suddenly you're analyzing and thinking about all these things all the time. And so you've forgotten how to calm your mind, and or maybe the situation is just so severe that it just creeps up into your mind. You can't help it. It's not something you're purposefully doing. But that is it takes a while to sit and realize, like, oh, I'm deliberately thinking about my throw as I'm standing here at the line. I kind of have to be able to stop pitching. It truly is an awful experience, and I wish it wasn't so taboo to talk about. I do think it's important to not nitpick and name players. I mean, I know for a reason of showing an example of trying to prove your point, that's okay for the purpose of education, like we are here today. But you do see a lot of players, they pick and point out, like, oh man, he's struggling with this, like, oh, this guy had a really bad case of the yips in this game. That's not necessarily helpful, unless you're using it for a specific reason. It's shameful. It was almost so taboo as to the point of where people were afraid to talk about mental illness. And I'd really think that's important to compare the two and say, it's all right for a person to come out publicly and say, yes, I'm struggling with this. I'm seeking help. It's another thing of, like, are you the one to bring it up? Like, always allow them to bring it up. Let them come to you about it if you're a close friend or loved one and you do want to help. As a culture, I think it's taken us a really long time to recognize that it's a problem, for one, and secondly, how to talk about it, how to talk about people that deal with it, and how to conduct yourself as someone that's trying to be an ally.
So with that said, which is very true, there's a mental aspect to it, and it can be personal issues that you're dealing with that have just gotten you down. We talk about Danny Bagish and the fact, and he was open about, hey, I'm dealing with some personal issues that happened. I'm here in the UK. Personal issues are happening in the US, and I can't do anything about it because I'm here representing my country and I'm doing this. We see this with Olympians. We see this with professional athletes, who maybe lose a parent or a brother or something the day of the game, and yet they go forward and they play. So, I mean, there are these aspects that could be just a personal inner, emotional situation. It could be something you're dealing with, family, just those types of aspects. Or it could be a situation where you're like, hey, and Jen, just to kind of use your situation where, this is who I am, but I'm afraid to show this to the world. And, you get the courage up and you finally do show it to the world. Those are things that can play mentally on how your game goes and how other aspects of your life go. But we're talking specifically about this. But Dax, I wanted to ask you, outside of, recognizing that these are some of the issues, what are things that people can kind of do to maybe help? Can you play through it? I guess is the big question. Can you play through the yips to correct the form? Or is it really a matter of maybe just getting mental help? What's your aspect on that?
It's a great question. There are a handful of general and some awkward things that people can do. They're kind of outside the box, and you have to be willing to kind of think.
Can you take a blue pill? That's what I want to know, because we keep saying anxiety performance. Can we take a blue pill? I wanted to throw that in there, so nope. Sorry. No blue pills. Okay.
Nope.
Got to deal with an issue.
Yeah. But really, you have to find a way to get outside of your own head in dealing with some of these things. And some of the things, and some of them are really just trial and error, playful things. I allude to a couple in the bottom part of the article as general things to try to really step outside the box, because you have to be willing to kind of let it all go, not take yourself so seriously in the moment. You can certainly look to play through it, so long as you're willing to take the energy of the people around you. And Jen started off by saying at the very beginning, it is worth talking about how other players could and should react to dealing with players you're playing against who may have the yips. Maybe a teammate has it. how to be supportive, or at the very least, how to be not malignant to the environment. You really don't want to. You don't want to make it worse. You also don't want it to affect your own game if you're playing against someone. But you want to be considerate. You want to be. You want to have proper etiquette still, regardless. And those are things to talk about as well. But I have made suggestions to people. A lot of people like the game beer pong. So throwing ping pong balls, the throw of beer pong is a very similar throw to a dart. Throw ping pong balls at the board. And people say, well, they don't stick, or you don't know where they land. Like, that's the point. It's not about this is not about targeting. This is about kind of reworking and retraining. I've had the same thing with just crumpled up beverage napkins, pieces of paper, and practicing the same motion. I've suggested to people sometimes to shoot at the actual number ring on the board. And they say, well, why? I don't need to hit that. I said, it's not about the targeting. It's literally about stretching out the arm and stretching out the mind and thinking about everything very differently. Again, there's no one right way, and it's all about, in essence, kind of tricking the brain a little bit. You really want to be able to be compassionate with yourself, recognize there's no quick fix, there's no blue pill, and really just working through the process and the journey, and just being kind to yourself, because it's so easy, as Jen would say, it's so easy to beat yourself up with the negative self-talk and the internal monologues. It's not helpful. It doesn't do anything to benefit your game. And then in getting to, I've played against a nice handful of players who have the yips, and the way to it, you really need to be compassionate. We're all in the same gang. We're all in the same community. So what if it takes someone a little extra longer to get the darts out? What good is it by yelling at someone or clicking your darts or being, sighing and huffing and puffing? The one thing I would say is, if it's affecting you as the opponent of someone who has this, definitely take a step back, have a sip of your beverage. Don't look at the board. Don't look at the player, and just be respectful like you would of any other player. It's should they be struggling, so be it. Hopefully, afterwards you have a moment of compassion for them and say, sorry you're struggling, good try, or good effort. And I'm sure Jen can speak to that as well.
Yeah.
So really, go ahead, Jen. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to tack on a couple more things of management of the yips. So that's one of those, should be a whole article, and I hope will be someday. Wink, wink to Dax. And then maybe structure is hard. Structure is really hard for an article like that. I would say you could maybe go like top 5 common reasonings of here's a fundamental reasoning behind it. Here's how people have successfully managed it. For me, you mentioned, that's really interesting. You mentioned ping pong balls, throwing other foreign objects instead of darts. And so there's the psychological, right? That's not a neurological issue per se. But I would say that helps people with the performance anxiety more than anything, because you've gotten that thing that they're used to having in their hand. That's kind of like their brain, their signals, firing off. They're used to holding that dart. And so there ensues all the bad habits that happen of how they deal with getting it out of their hand. What my friend taught me, we went to Home Depot and bought a box of drywall screws, and we just he had a cork board up, in behind as the backing to the dartboard instead of a surround. And so took the dartboard off and just threw freaking nails at the wall, over and over and over. And it's similar because it had a similar feel and texture and grip with the metal. But, obviously different enough length and shape to get your mind to think like you're just throwing a completely different object, and retrain yourself to trust your throwing mechanics. One other thing that helped me a lot was playing in the dark. And, maybe this is bad advice for people that are worried about their walls, but I don't know. I mean, I've played darts so long, I don't have a surround up in my house anymore. I'm pretty certain I'm not going to miss the board, and it's not an arrogant thing. It's just if I'm aiming at the bullseye segment, I'm probably safe. So I'd turn the lights off and go to the line. I always stand in the center of the line and throw the 3 darts and then turn the lights on and see how tight that grouping is. And it's about the targeting and the visualization of like getting that out of your head and learning and retraining those, that, what do you call it? Just that secondhand kind of nature of like, I have to do something physically to trick my mind and to not overpowering me if you're not mentally tough enough or strong enough. That's probably not the right word, because it's really not about toughness and about like, how much of a survivor you are. It just could be genuinely just too difficult to get over this root issue of some kind of an emotional trauma and your brain shutting off and trying to protect itself. So yeah, I would say those 2 things: throw in the dark, throw the different objects. One thing I'd love to just throw in real quick is what not to do. A lot of people, I've heard people give advice saying, just throw the dart really hard and force, to overcome the issue. I think that worsens the issue. Absolutely. You're just going absolutely against what you need to do, which is relaxing and trusting your normal mechanics. So please don't do that if anyone's ever tried it.
Yeah. Well, guys, we are getting to that time where we've got to land the plane, so to speak. So I just want to cover a couple last minute things and have you guys share where people can find you. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up was there's a guy out there, and I have this book. It's called With Winning in Mind by Lanny Basham. This is a gentleman who was an Olympian. He's world champion in rifle shooting, but he talks mainly about the mental game and how important the mental game is. And I think this is kind of a helpful thing, whether you're in Dartitis or just playing darts. He talks about, and Jen, this kind of goes to shutting out the lights, of playing the game mentally, not even throwing a dart, but visualizing yourself, visualizing the throw, visualizing perfection. Not a matter of missing, but absolute perfection. And he goes and talks about a gentleman who was in World War II, was in a concentration camp. And when he got out of the camp and they flew him back to San Diego, the first thing he wanted to do was go play golf. He made them stop and he went and played golf. The 3 years that he was in the concentration camp, he mentally, and this guy weighed less than 100 pounds, but he mentally played golf perfect for 3 years. That's what kept him sane. He went, and this is a guy who hadn't played. He went and shot par golf 3 years out of being a captive, weighing less than 100 pounds, went and shot golf. The first thing he did as soon as he hit the States, and he shot perfect. And it was because of the mental ability. So he talks about that in this book, and he talks about really that mental getting over the hump and playing mentally. Like he would talk about how he would go lay in a room, turn off all the lights, and he would mentally shoot. But he also talks about the Yips in his book, where he got the Yips in the Olympics and he lost the gold medal because of the Yips. So I just wanted to bring that out. This is a great book. Again, With Winning in Mind by Lanny Basham. He's got a whole mental program, and I used it when I was shooting archery, but I think it goes towards darts. Dax, Jen, really appreciate you guys being on the show. We could talk about this for hours. I'm sure there's more to go into, like how to recognize it, how to deal with it. I would love to have you both back on, especially when Article 2 comes out in a month or two. Dax, just saying, to talk more about this. So let's do like episode 2. We'll make this episode 1. Maybe we can turn this into a 3-episode little thing, and we'll talk more about it. Maybe physically be able to show some stuff about what's going on. But Dax, where can people find you? Because I know there's a lot of questions now, and I'm sure you're the man that can help them. Where can they find you?
You can find me on Facebook, DAX. You're going to see a big blue head of Dr. Manhattan. I'm pretty easy to find on Facebook. You can also find me through A2ZDarts.com. And I would actually also say, in thinking about article number 2, if any of your viewers have struggled or want to write into myself or to Jen and give their accounts and talk about some of the things that they've worked through or some of the techniques that they've used, that's the type of stuff that we would love to see in terms of writing that article, because there are things, we don't have all the answers, but we want to help provide for the answers. So if there are anyone out there who wants to share their accounts, by all means, reach out.
Yeah, please do. And I'd love to get some questions for next time we have you guys on specific about this and present them to you guys ahead of time so that we can answer them and help someone. That's the goal here, is to help people. So Jen, I know that you're super busy, of course, creating beautiful jerseys like what I'm wearing and what all three of us are wearing, except for you have the jacket on. I'm a little jealous because that jacket's pretty awesome.
This is a sample piece, sorry.
But where can people find you, and where can they get, really nice threads like Dax and myself are wearing?
Absolutely. Speaking to that, I'll pin, some kind of a post online to give someone a direct email where they can share those stories, advice, or ask questions, whether they're just trying to like help out with the scenario or specifically say, this is my exact situation. This is where I'm at mentally. Can you guys deliberate and think on that? I'd love to do that. We'll get some material ready for part 2. For me personally, I work with Magicwear, A to Z Darts, and USA Darts production live streams. So you can find me in any of those social media, customer service. My direct emails are always Jen at the URL of anywhere. But my primary goal is as graphic designer for Magicwear sports apparel. So right now with the pandemic, I totally understand. A lot of people don't have leagues. They don't have tournaments. They're not forming little teams. But if you want to get kind of a jump on custom design, if you think things are starting to open up, you're always welcome to share your ideas with me. I can easily arbitrarily negotiate price on custom designs. I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to reach out and see, but yeah, I mean, absolutely reach out to me anytime. My handle is at Jen Mounts Design on everything. I'm everywhere. So reach out anytime about this topic or other questions. Be happy to help.
Jen's everywhere. I do have one last question for you, Jen, in regards to your dartboard and your wife. Is she as accurate as you, or are there holes in the wall? Just curious.
She's great. Actually, most of the holes are because of me, because I throw with my left hand from time to time, and we'll just like be a little too confident about it. She's a great shot. She actually loves darts. Hates soft tip. Will only play steel tip. So she's got all the great like habits from the start. I don't think she's as prone for like the competitive aspect, but we did play the Camellia Classic a couple of years back together, so it was cool. She hit the winning out on, I think, mixed triples, and I think she was so excited about it, or she got distracted by someone, she left her darts on the board. And so like I give her shit all the time, like, oh, you were really proud of taking that out. You left your darts on the board for everyone to see. But yeah, hopefully she gets a little more excited about the competitive aspect. But yeah, she's doing just fine.
As long as she doesn't leave the darts in the board and then walk off stage in anger, then it's okay.
No, yeah.
No Dooza issues there, huh? That's good. Well, guys, thanks again for being on the show. You've been on a couple of times. I really appreciate it. I've told this to everybody. I love to send a gift to those that have been on the show, and of course, we've done the coffee mugs, which Dax, thank you very much for sponsoring me with that one. But I just want to say we now have coffee available, like actual physical coffee beans and grinds. So I'm going to send you guys some coffee this time, so that you can put something in the cup instead of just air.
All right.
I spit out. So thank you guys again for being on the show. Thank you everybody for watching. We will have them back on in a couple of weeks, and we will dive more into Darditis and how we can recognize it and how we can fix it to some degree, because everybody's an individual situation. If you're dealing with it right now, reach out to Dax. Dax does coaching, and he can help you to the best of his ability, being that you guys can't actually get together over it, so you can talk about it. So, all right, thank you guys. Thanks everybody for being on. I'll see you two later. Everybody have a wonderful day and keep throwing those 1080s. Thanks everybody.